All right, so let me show you what I got going on. I got the matriarch going out, MIDI out into the input of the Neutron. Now the Neutron, I have oscillator 1 going out back into the matriarch's oscillator 1 input on the mixer. So when I do that, the Neutron is going to take over oscillator 1 on the matriarch. So you won't hear the matriarch oscillator. But I do have oscillator 1 output going back into the Neutron on an attenuator, so I can control the amount of wave coming out of the matriarch into the Neutron. And then I have that attenuator going into oscillator 1 of the Neutron. So essentially, oscillator 1 of the matriarch is modulating the pitch of oscillator 1 on the Neutron. And then on top of that, I have an LFO going into the pitch of oscillator 1 on the matriarch. And that's pretty much it. That's how I got it set up. So, why you should never sell your gear? Well, have you ever gone on forums and you hear a person say, "Oh man, I used to have that Roland Juno 106 and I sold it cheap and I regret selling it." A lot of times people sell gear because the trend in gears change. Like for instance, at one time analog was the hot thing, and then when the 80s happened and DX7 and Roland D50 and different digital synthesizers came out, now everybody was dumping their analog synthesizers and going. I've even heard stories of people selling their analog gear for $100, $50 to pawn shops Or I've heard of people buying the original 808s for, $100 at the fast forward years later. Now people want the analog gear, especially the vintage analog gear. The lucky ones who bought the analog gear back in the 80s, well sought after gear that they now can resell if they want to. So gear over time, even digital gear, will eventually go up higher over time when there are not many out there and people start to remember why they love that piece of gear in the first place. So that leads into really like my number one reason why I feel like you should never sell your gear is because at some point in the future you may regret selling it. You are going to remember why you love that piece of gear, or you might watch a video and somebody else is playing that piece of gear and you're like, wow, that sounds amazing, I can't believe I sold that. And when I say gear, I'm not even just talking about like synthesizers or drum machines. I remember I had a MIDI interface that goes into the computer and I can plug in MIDI gear. And I remember selling that very, very early on in my music journey. At the time, I thought I needed it, but then I didn't because I guess the lack of knowledge that I had of equipment, I didn't think I needed it. So I ended up selling it. And then probably maybe even a year or two later, I realized, damn, I could use that right. So I ended up going back to the store and buying not the exact same thing, but something that does very similar to that MIDI interface. Another example that's really personal to me is never sell your cables. At one time, really the only synthesizer I had was the Chord Chronos. So I had a left and right cable going into my interface, and really that's all I needed. I bought a auction lot and it had audio cables in that lot. Now I'm thinking I'm going to just sell these cables because I really don't need it. I held on to the cables because really I wasn't in a rush to sell them, but in my mind, mentally, I'm thinking I'm going to get rid of these cables. Well, after some time, that's when I got my Mackie mixer. I always had a dream of mixing on a real analog mixing console and not just in the DAW. So I bought a Behringer interface with ADAT to extend the amount of channels that I could use. So now I can mix 16 channels on the analog mixing board, which I really utilize all of those audio cables that I saved from the auction. Had I sold those cables, then I would have had to go out to Guitar Center or whatever to buy more cables. Our music studio is like a living, breathing thing. It always changes and molds into different things. And, when you sell cables, you never know that sometime in the future you may need that. So I did speak on the value of gear going up over time. But really, if you don't need the money, go ahead and just, even if you're just determined, look, I really don't need it, I don't play it, I bought something that's the same thing that's better. I mean, like for instance, I have the Sonic SQ1, but I also have the Ensoniq SD1. Well, the SD1 is a more advanced SQ1. Like the SQ1 really doesn't do anything the SD1 doesn't. So I hold on to the SQ1 because if sometime in the future I need the money, I can always sell that and get the money. I'm not in a rush to sell it because I don't really need the money right now. It's kind of like a way of saving money because if I sell it, what am I going to do? Put it in the bank. And you already know, putting your money in the bank, you're not going to gain anything off of that. But let's just say right now, hypothetically, I sell it for $300. Maybe, who knows, maybe 5 years from now, it'll be worth $500. So instead of just throwing my money into the bank and it's not gaining anything, I have an asset that over time could increase in value. Marriage hack. Tell your wife or husband, hey, this is the reason why I'm buying these keyboards. These are great investments. So really the one piece of gear that I sold that I regret, I mean, at the time I needed the money, but I regret selling the Korg M3. And reason being because I had a lot of beats in the Korg M3 because when I had it, I didn't use any DAW. I totally used it as a standalone unit, and I have a lot of beats that I saved in the Korg M3 format. I can't load that into the Chronos. Now, what I could have done was save the MIDI, and I could upload the MIDI and then change each instrument to the same as the M3, but you still lose the effects. You lose other minor changes that was specific to the Korg M3. So truly, for me to get those beats back, I have to buy another M3. But in the comments, tell me a piece of gear that you sold that you regretted, or maybe you end up having to buy later on in the years. I still don't have an M3. At some point, I will get it just because, it's always nice to go through your old beats and maybe revise them and bring them to life. That's it. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any requests or things you want to see or want to hear, or maybe even me talk about, let me know. You can check out my tracks and my music at biggrime.net. I'm also on all streaming platforms: Spotify, YouTube Music, iTunes, etc. All right, peace.